Welcome, and thank you for tuning in to Black Women Amplified, the podcast. Your host, Monica Wisdom Tyson, brings you downloadable conversations that matter to women around the globe. We discuss all things Black girl magic, amplify our voices, and transform our challenges into triumphs. Monica calls on her league of extraordinary women to push our boundaries, share their expertise, and stories of personal transformation. Welcome your host of Black Women Amplified, Monica Wisdom Tyson.
Hello, Black Women Amplified. This is your girl, Monica Wisdom, and I am so happy that you were here with us today. We have an incredible show lined up for you. We have a conversation with another fantastic author. I feel like I need to start a book club. I think I'm going to start a book club. We're getting so many authors on the show that I would love to discuss their books because it's so much I can't say during the interview because it gives away the story, but maybe we can read them together. I can read them again and read them together and have a discussion. What do you think? What do you say? Do you like book clubs? I'm personally an audiobook person. I love to relax and listen to books a little bit more than reading. It's strange because when I start reading a book, I will fall asleep. Like my brain just goes la la land. But when I'm listening, I'm very engaged, especially if there is a great actor reading the book. I'm actually listening to Barack Obama's book, his last book that he wrote after he left the presidency, and it's very fascinating. And I also just listened to Jennifer Lewis's book, The Mother of Hollywood. It's funny. She's just funny. But listening to her tell her own story is just hilarious. So maybe we'll do a book club. Let me know what you think about that. Just hit me up on our social media, on the Instagram, the Black Women Amplified Instagram, or you can email me at blackwomenamplified@gmail.com. That's the easiest way to reach me. But today we have a great conversation with an author who has her own book series. It's so exciting. You know, I love to celebrate Black women. I love when we win. I love when they hear us and they allow us to do what we want to do without crafting too much of the other stuff within our own art. So this is one of those conversations. And she's here to talk about her third book in the series, The Improvisers. Nicole Glover is the brilliant writer behind The Conductors and The Undertakers, the first two books in her Murder and Magic book series. Her book follows the adventures of vivid characters solving mysteries across time and space. Following the lineage of the Rhodes family, we meet Velma Frye as she solves mysteries and crimes following clues as a pilot in the 1930s. Velma is an independent, curious woman and carries her family legacy with pride, from Chicago, Illinois to the seaside town of Rainbow Crescent, fashioned after historic seaside cities throughout Black history. Nicole Glover joins the show to share her passion for writing, Black history, creating new worlds, and explains the genesis of celestial magic. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Nicole Glover to the Black Women Amplified show. Hello, Nicole. How are you? Welcome to the Black Women Amplified podcast.
It's great to be here and excited for this conversation.
I am too. How does it feel to be releasing your third book?
I'm a bit surreal. It's, the first two came out back to back in the same year. It's been quiet, but I've been busily working on the next one. And so it's a bit of the same old, but it's new at the same time because, it's new year, new book, and all the new excitement things around it.
Now, when you started your journey as an author, did you expect such acclaim? I know everybody hopes for it, but did you expect that it was going to happen for you?
I kind of hoped for it in the back of my mind. I wanted to be a writer since I was a very young child. I'd always been a big book reader, so I've always gone to the libraries, bookstores, and always wanted to see like my book on the shelves. So that kind of was something I always kind of hoped for and kind of won for. I guess in some ways maybe expected it. You write a book, you think it's going to go everywhere. And in many ways, it's kind of like what I thought it would be, but in many ways it's different. So I guess it's the reality of certain things, of how the mechanics of how publishing works is different than what I imagined as a kid, where books kind of dropped out of the air. But at the same time, it's kind of fun and it's what I want it to be. And I still hope for, bigger and brighter things in the future, of course.
How did you discover the murder mystery genre?
Oh, I'd say because I always say I think stumbled across some like mystery books and either a mix of like, the ones that for kids, like the were like the Nancy Drews and Boxcar Children to like the adult ones that, that I might have read earlier than I should have. But I don't know as well as a bunch of like cozy mysteries and things like that. So I kind of gravitated toward the mysteries. 'Cause I like puzzles, like figuring things out, like kind of guessing who might be a murderer, like all these crimes, and even like the books with heists and stuff. So that always kind of appealed to me as it's fun and it's also a great like engine to tell stories because mysteries can propel any kind of story you can think about, whether it's no matter across genres. So it makes it a really good place to kind of build a story and kind of make something I'd want to write. And I think actually some of my first little stories were mysteries, I think, kind of going back to those early childhood mystery books I'd read. I think the first little stories I scribbled about were mysteries in many ways.
Were you a Sherlock Holmes fan?
Yeah, I'm a bit of a fan. I think as much as I like the story, I like the kind of the character type, the duality of having like the person solving mystery, but also having the main narrator being someone who's like the layman, the everyday person who kind of is the scribe. I mean, he's also a writer too. So I like that. I like that duo dynamic most of all. But I think also the idea of there's a detective that can solve things that's almost like the police other people can't really think about. So I think I like that dynamic as well.
Now, aside from writing murder mysteries or mystery books, you have a way of being able to be a mystery yourself. Because in researching you, I'm like, where is this girl? You have mastered in the world of social media of remaining stealth. Is it just because you want the focus on your book, or you're just not a public person?
I mean, it's a mix of things. I say I'm a very private person. I don't like this, every detail out in the world, though. And I think also because I also worked a little bit in tech, so I'm also leery of anything you put out in the world, it's going to be there forever. So I like to be careful in what I put out in the world. So you can find if you dig in certain places.
Can you tell us a little bit about the world you were raised in and how it has impacted your work as a writer?
I grew up in a military family. My dad had been in the military for several years, and we moved around a fair bit, not extensively. We did not leave the country. We did not live across all around the US, but we did move several times in Virginia for his job. And my mom's always kind of there as she'd decided I guess basically when I was born, because I'm the oldest, that she was going to stay at home and be like this like kind of consistent support for us, for support system while my dad's out there going places and taking all these trips around the world and stuff. And yeah, he's taken quite a few trips of like most interesting time was he'd gone to Brussels once, like literally the day after we had a hurricane hit. And my mom was not happy about that. But
I'm sure.
he came back with chocolate for all of us, actually, because I have two other sisters. So she came back with a bunch of chocolate and gifts to kind of make up for it.
I've been to Belgium and there's chocolate everywhere, so he could not come home with chocolate.
Yeah, so he's that's kind of make up for that. But for the most part, our parents are a team. They're a tag team for stuff. Like it's always as we ask for something, like a video game or extra like allowance or something like that. They'll ping pong us between like ask your mother, ask your father, and even though we know the answer is about the same and stuff, it's I don't know. It's my dad's a big fan of like spreadsheets and like putting together like uh what he called the journey, which is like a list, basically kind of list of like of idealized plan what we want to do for the year. I think we did that, I guess middle school, high school age for my sister, like basically kind of map out like what we plan to do. And it was like a New Year's thing we did for that time period. And so we mapped out our goals for the year that we want to aspire to. And so I think when I was graduating high school, he called it the Odyssey then. And I think that was the last time we did it. But it was basically kind of like, here's how we map out stuff. And I think when I'd moved to get my first apartment, he had me like make a spreadsheet out for my year, like how I break down my monthly salary into all the bills and groceries and things like that. So he's always kind of big in planning it out that way. And it's always his thing for that. And my mom was kind of just there to help out with. I guess she's like consistent. Like people always say their mom's like their number one emergency contact, and she's kind of like that for all of us. She was there for every little thing, And like, she liked also like to help. I always remember like helping out with a bunch of little projects we did in school and stuff. All this the weird, even like the weirdest like out there projects for school. She'd be there helping be the kind of putting our creative input for things. And she got me to think about differently how they approach different programs and things like that.
Well, that explains how you were able to organize your books. You learned really early how to organize your plots of your books. Your books have strong, dynamic Black women, and Velma Frye is one of those women. And in your third book, you're adding new elements as we meet her in The Improvisers. She's a pilot, an investigator, a jazz pianist, and a welder of celestial magic. What inspired you to create such a complicated, magical woman? And are any of her qualities that you share as well?
The creation of any kind of characters, kind of drawing out the different aspects around the world, whether it's historical figures, just interesting, this aspect of people you see around you, and kind of melding it together and seeing what works for the story. With Velma, I think the core of it comes from all the aspirational, inspirational figures of the Black pilots of day, Bessie Coleman, the big one, as well as, let's see, Willa Brown, Janet Bragg, and other female pilots that you probably won't hear as much about, who all played major roles through the 30s, throughout the 40s within aviation aspect of things. So kind of bring that element I wanted to make sure that was present in her character, like the expiring person who goes out and do things that are unexpected. Like Bessie Coleman literally went to another country to get a pilot's degree because she couldn't, the pilot's license because she couldn't get one in the US. And basically, as she is now, as she was back then, a big inspiration to everyone to kind of say, oh, you can do the impossible, which was flying a plane. Other aspects of her characters, it's, the investigating, the pianist part, and all, as well as, being being a slightly reformed bootlegger, all these kind of things are kind of tied into the era of where people had to invent to be creative and do different things. But her character is more like, as I always think, it's the person who wants to strive and do the impossible and they seek it out. And those elements that kind of always appeal to me within the character, someone who sees the door slamming and saying, oh, I'm gonna edge my way through, or want to chart my own path. And in many ways, this book is set in the 1930s because I wanted to kind of be that aspirational, that inspirational vein of someone who's just going to make their own path in the world.
Yeah, I love that you chose the 1930s. It's an era that we don't often hear about when it comes to Black people. And there were a lot of Black people that were thriving during that time because, we had to. We're entrepreneurs and innovators. And I love the 1930s because it adds so much texture to the story, from jazz to prohibition. What was your research process to ensure that it was historically accurate, but still fantasy and had the magical elements?
I think when I approach historical fantasies, I get enough details that are right, that the most obvious stuff is I'm not missing up, like, the end dates for Prohibition, or when the Depression era started, and all these different things, or even like key players of this time period. I make sure the basic facts are right. And then I go and see, like, what can I meld and mesh around? I mean, the setting is a fantasy world building off of the world I started my first two earlier books. So I have some leeway of like being loose around the smaller details and stuff. So I get this, and basically that's where you decide what works for the story. What works for the story is, to me, to have a really thriving aviation community, even though it may not, historically might have peaked a few years later than where I set the book, but it's close enough that it still works. And trying to decide like where you can bend and mesh and where it doesn't like conflict with everyone's point of view of the story. I always say you can't have computers running around in the 1930s or an earlier time, because that's too off the wall. But you can bend on certain inventions as long as it made sense within the context, especially when, like I said, you're playing with magic as well. So you can have that allowance for it. But I do set these stories in historical time periods for a reason. So I try to stay pretty true to the time periods and whatnot. And I approach research by looking at what works, like I said, what works, what doesn't work, and where I can make things work better for me.
I can tell there's lots of details in this book. It's pretty magnificent. First thing I thought was, oh, this is an epic. I hope this is turned into a television show so that we can get into the details of of all the incredible elements of this book. Now, Velma's journey touches on family, legacy, and power. What role does her family history play in shaping her path?
They play a major role. That's why the book kind of starts with the family tree. It's the way they kind of show not just how the world changed slightly between the first two books, this one, but they kind of show how attached and how very involved she is with the family. There's a whole little section where you see her extended family for a bit, see interactions with them, and to kind of compare and contrast how she fits into everything. And that's kind of, and I also saw her work as a magical investigator is directly tied to her grandparents, the main characters from the first two books, who were among not just mystery solvers, but former underground railroad conductors who had been very involved in their community at that time and still remain highly involved in their community. And that she's took that inspiration from seeing how they work and interact with people and saying, I want to do something similar in my own way, but live up to the high standards they had raised her up in and around.
That's beautiful. I did notice at the beginning, I was like, oh, wait a minute. The family tree. Okay, it all connects because I know that this is a standalone book, but she's still continuing the legacy of her family. That's beautiful. In this book, there are very magical artifacts, which are very intriguing. Now, if you could design an item for yourself, what would it be and why? And what would it do?
Oh, design my own thing. I guess obvious for me would be like a pen that could, write, I can dictate and write, I can write on paper on itself, basically. I can talk to it and do all the writing for everything. And all that, we have multiple tool option with this pen, has lights and all this kind of fancy stuff. I guess basically a combination of devices into a pen. I mean, that's a big one, I think. And I don't know, something with an umbrella that flies, from like Mary Poppins in a sense. I don't know, I guess for easy travel. And it's protection from elements as well. Maybe something with a bicycle, because I love my bicycles, but they need some juiced up things, I think. But...
Right. It takes you through time and space.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's an interesting character. I don't know if he's a frenemy or a nemesis, but Velma and Dylan Harris, the journalist, have a very complicated relationship. Can you tell us the genesis of their tension within the relationship?
It's for me the dynamic between them is the classic. They both talk too much but can't listen to the other person. They have a lot in common, but they won't admit to it. That sort of thing. I always loved like kind of bantering, kind of like you make good points, but I don't want to admit to it kind of relationships. And that was a very fun dynamic for me to write throughout the book. And it's kind of harkened to a lot of the screwball comedies of that era. I think in some ways I opened the book with them basically going back and forth in the newspaper columns they both each had at the newspaper they worked at. And that's kind of, in some ways, a reference to an old movie, Woman of the Year, with Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn, who I remember watching it a long time ago, wishing they had that bantering aspect with the newspaper articles lasting longer. So this is, in some ways, is me getting my way of having a little bit more in my own book and stuff. So I kind of based that kind of dynamic off of that, like, it's sense of like they're just going at each other, but not really getting, I guess, because they got so enmeshed and so stubbornly enmeshed in these roles, it's hard to break out of it. And throughout the book, you see that they work well together. They have to basically figure that out for their own self as they work together throughout the case and mystery. So that was kind of fun, working not just having them work together with the mystery, but working out the kinks in their relationship.
Mm-hmm. They were very interesting. It's like, he's on my trail. Mm-hmm. It was fun. It was fun to read their interactions.
Hello, everyone. Monica Wisdom here. I am the host and the producer of the Black Women Amplified podcast. But what you might not know is that I'm also a consultant for women entrepreneurs. I help women entrepreneurs develop their ideas, their brand, and their overall business strategy. Are you developing a groundbreaking idea or have a wealth of knowledge that could impact the world but unsure where to go next? Business is good, but you're ready for it to be great. With countless ideas racing through your mind, it's challenging to figure out what's next. I understand. You have excelled with top companies, but entrepreneurship feels like a new language. The truth is, you can do this. You've achieved great success for others, and now it's time to achieve it for yourself. At Monica Wisdom Consulting, we focus on your vision and crafting a clear, concise, strategic plan. Your dreams are within reach. You simply need a powerful roadmap to get you there. Are you ready to take the next step? Book a call and let's discuss your vision and future. You can reach me at www.monicawisdomhq.com.
Now, your first two books, The Conductors and The Undertakers, follow Hattie and Benjamin. And for those that are being introduced to your work now, can you tell us a little bit more about those books and the characters of Hattie and Benjamin?
Yes, my first two books, The Conductors and The Undertakers, take place post-Civil War in Philadelphia. It's 1871. And basically, Hattie and Benji had been kind of doing mystery solving in their neighborhood, in their community for a few years. But in the first book, they get a rather unusual case where one of their close friends is found murdered, and they got to figure out who it is and maybe think it's someone in their social circle that might have been involved in it. And the second book basically picks up a few months later with another mystery and within the community that they had to deal with that is kind of centered around mysterious fires that have been very alarming, but seem to have reasons that seem a little bit too more obvious than it might be on the surface.
Amazing.
And those books are those books for me answer the question of what people did after the Civil War, after they got the freedoms, and people, they did all kinds. They figured out, they found the connect with family, they found jobs. And for me, solving murder mystery seemed an obvious answer for me, with people with skills to evade and to go travel and go places that those underground railroad conductors once did.
I love that you are interjecting our history into that time frame, because it's not, of course, it's not told, but most people don't even think about it. They don't think about that time period between the end of slavery and the beginning of Jim Crow. It's like it's a mystery in itself. So I love that you're putting these characters back into the lexicon of our history. That's a beautiful thing. Now, I am thrilled to hear that The Conductors is being adapted to film. I'm excited about that. How is that process going? And what has the process been? And what did it feel like for Queen Latifah and the Jim Henson, the iconic Jim Henson Company, say, hey, we want to turn this into a film?
Oh yeah, it's surreal to see two names like that I'm real familiar with. And I guess the backtrack a little bit, it's just been options for the most part. I'm actually, not entirely really close to what's going on with the film side of things. It's one of these cases where they get the rights and they do what they want with it, basically. But still, I got paid for it. I got to say these people they read my stuff, were interested in it. So that's, to me, a boon all around. So I don't have really any updates with that, but
you know what? That's okay, because the film industry is going through a whole thing. So it might be better to wait anyway. Yes, but just the idea that your story can become a film, like, do you have a vision of what that will look like for you, or who would star in it, who would write the screenplay, all of those things?
not too much. I mean, I always say, like, when it comes to casting, I always say, like, open someone unknown, someone who can be undiscovered, sort of thing. I think always we always get stuck on for casting certain people, but beyond that, I guess I always kind of want like a short, like mini series or series, whatnot. Because I always feel like a mystery I guess because I'm used to all those procedural shows where you have a mystery per week, but have an overarching thing. That would be my ideal adaptation. And I have like a short I guess, because they're doing short seasons now, I guess, 8 to 10 episode season with little mysteries, with a larger overarching thing would be ideal. But a film could still work in either way. So it would always be interesting to see what happens with it. Because I know with any adaptation, there are lots of things that get changed around. So I guess I've always been the person, like, long as keep the spirit of the book and story in the adaptation, anything can go with it, how it comes about.
I've interviewed two other authors who are having TV shows. Nikki May and Jane Allen are both going through the same process. And so I think it's beautiful that they are putting our stories on the screen, written by us, for us. So that's, regardless of where it is in the process, I'm grateful that it's happening. Now, Velma is on assignment to solve a mystery, and she's flying across the nation to these different cities. What are the significance of these cities, primarily Bramble Crescent?
Mhm.
I've never heard of that until I read this book.
Yeah, this Bramble Crescent is my creation for the story. It's entirely fictional, but it's based off of Oak Bluffs and Mountain Vineyard, the classic Black town on that part of the world. I think I remembered going to the National History of African American History and Culture Museum up in DC, and walking to exhibits and being surprised. Oh, there's Black people in Martha's Vineyard, that sort of thing. I didn't know there was like a
Right.
town like that before, because I always heard of Martha's Vineyard, but I never heard of Oak Bluffs.
Or Sag Harbor. Yeah.
Mhm. So yeah, all those places like that, those beach towns like that really fascinated me. So I thought it'd be great for this story that Velma kind of grew up on an island, kind of based off of these things that are like an all Black town. It's been not fully isolated, but isolated enough they can build up their own unique kind of culture. So I envision that Velma grew up in a place where, magic is freely like done around her, like it's natural. People, there'll be people would let their groceries be like unpack themselves because of magic, or that it's just more casual use compared to the US or the main states where it's more restricted, more rules, especially with the elements of prohibition going on in this particular book as well. I like the contrast of how she grew up thinking about magic differently, and how you can see how she uses magic when she's on the island and when she's elsewhere. And it's very, I like the idea that it's very different, how it kind of informs how she acts as well, because how she approaches things. And as for other places you'll see across the book, some of them honestly were picked for the map, because I had this idea she's going to crisscross from east to west, basically. So I had to structure how she gets there, because I actually looked at like the old U.S. airmail postal maps where they had charted these courses across the U.S. and given the vision, because I envisioned that's how she kind of gets across the country, kind of using something map similar like that. So I visualized that and looked at what's kind of close to where I want it to be, because I wanted to do different regions of the U.S. and kind of picked off these places of interest and everything like that. And that's why another major stop she makes is like Sacramento, which I thought was an interesting place for just to have her backstory as being a bootlegger, being where she did a bunch of stuff. That's where she did the whole bootlegging stuff at California, and just draw in some different elements that we hadn't seen in the other books. The other books were all mostly set in Philadelphia. So this is my chance to be like a travel book to different places of the US and kind of see how magic might crop up differently across the place.
I loved it. I love travel, and I think it's important. And I love that she was able to freely travel across the nation in the 1930s. You don't think about that. You still think a certain perspective or a certain image or an idea of what Black people were doing back then, but to know that she was flying.
Yeah, and that's another important thing about being the pilot. That's probably why I was strongly felt this should be a travel book, because that's because she has the access to the plane, the flying, and I think it's also another, I guess, theme, or I guess symbolism of her be able to freely go as she please for the most part, but with care. I make it a point that she has friends and connections to these places she stops, and where she doesn't have friends or connections nearby, it's a different sort of tension when she lands, opposed to when she knows she has a friendly face nearby.
Yeah, I loved how she built herself a barn and how beautiful it was described. She wanted a special place for her plane. Now, talk to me about the magic. What is celestial magic? And is it something that only lives inside of your book, or is it derived from other different magical systems?
And kind of special magic is what I kind of created for my magic system, is the idea that the magic that people can express in the world, they kind of base it off on the constellations. They look at this as these are like basically the constellation or the frame in which they can focus their magical energy upon. And I think that's kind of the basic idea of it. Because I like the idea that the magic can also be expressed in certain crafts, like someone who sews or makes jewelry, like Velma makes jewelry, so she can stores up her certain magical abilities or energies as well. And so it can be expressed different ways, but the magic system allows it to be kind of funneled through. And this element of this is kind of what I was building upon the earlier book, but also done differently in certain ways. It's basically how it's expressed and how it's being used about. And it includes a system that I thought it's mostly, I mostly get kind of based off of astrology for fun, but I also thought it ties a lot culturally that's why when I first developed in the first two books about how you can look to the stars and it's there and free. You can use that as a way to map out the magic. And there's other parts of the system that includes potion making, which I mean that's another going back to more becoming a naturalist of making of potions and herbal remedies and things like that, which is also another reason why it was part of the prohibition thing as well, because my research for prohibition was like a lot of prohibition has lots of interesting roots, but most of it has coming from like a nativist, like, these foreigners, these Black people, these Irish people, they're drinking and doing bad stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So we're gonna ban. That's why prohibition came about, basically. And that's what made having like potions as part of that, wrapped up in that prohibition aspect of it, wasn't a natural fit for it. And it'll also be like that. Of course, that's why we do certain things for it. But yeah.
That's really cool. And I think about that when I think about people, loving crystals and herbal lotions and healing properties of different plants. And I love, how the ancient elements were put into this book as well, besides historical, because we are rooted people in many different things. I think about my dad when he gave me a hot toddy when I was sick, all the things that went into that, his potion, his drink to make me better. Now, when the books are incredible, and thank you for putting your art out into the world. And when I very rarely hear about Black women writing mystery novels or intriguing novels like this, are there any other authors that are also out in this world that we should be paying attention to?
Yeah, there are plenty, but it's whenever someone asks about the other authors, all the names blank out because I never know who's doing the place. But basically, you can seek out places. If you go on social media, ask about writers. I think there's different genres. There's a bunch out there. It's most in many cases it's hard to find in some places, but there are out there, and you talk to the right people.
Now, what advice do you have for women that are interested in exploring this genre?
I think either as a reader or a writer.
As a writer, anybody who's interested in getting into writing mystery novels, adventure stories, creating their home world, what advice do you have for them?
I think with writing, start with things you like and enjoy reading. Do you like reading about, murder mysteries where, they have the classic, everyone's at a dinner party and somebody falls face first in the soup. Write your own story and kind of just build off the things, what elements you enjoy reading about or reading or watching about or hearing about, and kind of work that way in. And if you're not comfortable with it, read other people, learn about the different tropes and themes you might see in these kind of stories, and be afraid to be inventive about it. Because some of these stories are fairly familiar and well trotted, so you can learn to mix it up, make things surprise, make your own little twist, certain things, and be unafraid about it because there's lots of people who can write really well, but also a lot more people who write really badly. So don't be afraid that you're the worst person out there.
Now, what was your journey to becoming published?
Oh, that's a long one. I think I'd started some years ago. I think I'd written some older stories that I had like kind of basically used as trial case to figure out how publishing works. Because I decided that I'm going to the traditional route, so I knew I needed an agent. So I think whatever story I felt confident about, I started pitching to agents. I did my research about where to find them, what best place to reach them, what genres they're looking for, their open submission at all, and just made the list and started submitting basically. And I got a lot of rejections before I even got interested in people seeing the first couple chapters. And for a while, I actually got to the point. I did a bunch of old stories. I think eventually I did it with the conductors. And even that wasn't like biting for a while. I think just when I decided I'm going to put the conductors up, a person that became my agent actually reached out and saying, "Oh, this looks interesting. I'd like to see if you had any." He had recently updated it because it was been a while since I had sent it out. So I said yes. I sent out the new version. She liked it. She signed me. And I think we worked together for this one last kind of update before we sent out to editors. And it was on submission out with editors for about 2 months before I signed the contracts to get the book published. And that's really fast. Doesn't always happen. It's very rare that it happens. And I got really lucky. I had signed the 2-book deal, which became the Conductors and the Undertakers. And it's, I would say the rest is history, but it's getting started in some ways. The thing is with that, the publication of the first 2 books, I think I originally only had the Conductors as 1 book. And when they said 2 books, I wasn't sure where to get the second book out of. But luckily, as I was editing the first book, I was able to pull out from my things I cut to make the Undertakers. Because the benefit of knowing was coming in with 2 books is saying, I could say, oh, I could save this for later, or maybe I don't have to squish all this into 1 book. I can, extend these things to another one. And through that kind of revision process, that when I came around for this round, where I got another 2-book deal for the Improvisers and the next book that's coming out, I had generated some ideas of like what I want the future of the series to look like. And I think in the back of my mind, I always wanted to do different generations, because I always did a bunch of research throughout the historical time period. And it was also kind of fun to see how this world would change with different time periods. So when I came up first saying they wanted 2 more books, the series, like I kind of pitched, well, this, different with the different decades and stuff. So I came up with these things, and here I am.
Now you're working on book number 4. Where does that fit into the series? Is it going backwards, forwards? Is it the same characters, new characters?
No, it's new characters going forward to 1964.
Oh,
So
wow.
we're looking at the main character is basically she works at like a NASA facility, but it's more magically based research and stuff. So it's very 60s in that aspect of the space race and stuff. You can tell it's very inspired by Hidden Figures when it came out. When I remember when the book and the movie subsequently got announced, I was like, yes, because I was thinking for a while when it was in the 1960s, and I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. And then I always loved space. So when I came out with Hidden Figures came out, which also unleashed a torrent of other research to other female scientists in that era that aren't just the ones that featured in that book and movie. I got all a bunch of extra research that was easy to find for this book.
Right.
So that one was a lot of fun to write, because it's looking at, I guess what I could say for now, it's like it's a treasure hunt that leads to both the stars and below the seas.
I smell a little Black Panther. I smell a Star Trek.
Yeah,
That's gonna be fun.
yeah, it's because I think this one I got to indulge a lot of my science fiction tendencies and interests. I even made the main character very interested into the science fiction novels and comics of the time period. So
Well, that is something to look forward to. I can't wait. And then I can't imagine your book for 2057. The great, 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 great grandchildren of Hattie and Benjamin.
yeah, it's fun. That's anything. If you look at the family tree, you can see where I leave my seeds for other stories. Because there's a bunch of stories I could write in the decades I'd skipped between the books. So I always have a bunch of ideas. I leave seeds for anything when I happen to get lucky enough to get a chance or a pitch for the book in the future.
Definitely. When I looked at the family tree, I was like, wow, they were busy.
Mm-hmm.
It went from 2 people to a couple of families to like, oh my goodness. So there's lots of stories to tell and lots of decades to hit. And I'm sure in your research, you have come across so many ideas of where you can go with each one.
Yeah, I just write them. I just have a list of all the things that whenever I get a chance or someone asks me to, I got a list ready to go.
Always prepared. That's the advice. Be prepared and keep a notebook with your ideas in it, because you never know what it's going to spark.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Nicole, thank you so much for this conversation. I hope that this is made into a mini series. I would love to see Velma flying across the country on my TV screen, and I'm wishing you all the best, and hopefully the movie will be made and the next whenever. Is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience?
No, but other than that, just if you have an idea, feel free to dream big and go after it.
Oh, I have one final question.
Yes.
What is your Black girl magical power?
Ooh, my magical power. Is it cliche to say being creative and imaginative? I like to, look at what's the ordinary and see how I can make it extraordinary.
That's beautiful and hopeful in a world
Yes.
full of cynics. So tapping into your imagination is your magical power. That's beautiful. So how can people find out more about you and the projects that you're working on?
Yeah, my main place to look for any updates information will be my website, nicole-glover.com. I'm sporadically on email, on social media. My Instagram is author Nicole Glover. And I think that's it for now. I have a newsletter, my Substack. I think you can find a link on my website. We'll have more in-depth of updates as well as other thoughts about writing. And I might have more social media in the future. Who knows? Who knows?
I doubt it.
Yeah,
It's scary on these internet streets. Stay
it is.
stealth.
Yeah.
Stay stealth. Now, I just want to thank you again for this opportunity to speak with you. Again, the best of luck for everything. And listeners, I will put a link to her latest book as well as her previous books in the show notes so that you can tap into the world of Nicole Glover. Thank you so much, Nicole. And thank you, Black Women Amplified listeners. Make sure that you visit our website, www.blackwomenamplified.com, to sign up to our newsletter, as well as more news and information about Black Women Amplified. Have an amazing day, and we will talk to you soon. Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Welcome to the Afterglow with Monica Wisdom. Did you enjoy the conversation I had with Nicole Glover? It was intense in a good way. I got all of my questions answered, so I was excited about that. I'm always very curious when people write fantasy. I'm just curious about their process. Like, how do you tap into your imagination? How do you keep track of all the characters and the storylines? Because you're literally making everything up. Like, from the stars in the sky to the cities, everything is created. As opposed to a novel where there's, you could say London and London is London, or you could say, South Carolina is South Carolina. But when you're making up a whole world, what does that look like? And how do you keep track of it? Because my scatterbrain, I don't know if I could do it. I can't keep focused to write an essay. But so I loved hearing her process. And I think that her incredible passion for Black history is all throughout this book. It's just all throughout this book. And she really writes just dynamic characters. One thing I really enjoyed about the book, the physical book, because I have the physical book, I would take a picture of it and show it to you, but it's not the finished book. It's the promo book. I tend to get the promo books, but she has a family tree inside of the book. So we follow the family tree, and the protagonist in this book is Velma Frye. And Velma Frye is the granddaughter of the people in the first two books. So even though she took a departure from her first two books, so the characters don't carry on, the family does. So she has a list of several family members, husbands and wives and kids. So there's many different directions she can go in throughout her series. She could take it in many different, when I think about Star Wars or Star Trek or, all the stories that can come out of one idea. And she gets to explore it. And I think that's beautiful for her, that she gets to tap into her imagination, and she has a team that supports her in this journey of hers as an author. When the publicist that contacted me to interview her, I've worked with her before. She's an amazing lady. And I had just finished my interview with Jane Allen. And then the next day, she was like, hey, oh, by the way. I said, well, that was quick, because normally sometimes it's a couple of months between particular person sending me somebody else. And the publicist send me people, and they're not in alignment with Black Women Amplified. So anybody listening to this, if you have reached out to me, or you're a publicist who's listening and you want your person to be on this show, I just want you to know that if I decline the opportunity, it's not because I don't think that the person is a great person or they have a great product or a great whatever. It's that it's not in alignment with this podcast. It's very specific what I'm looking for, and everything for me has to flow organically. I'm not a podcaster who's just going to interview everybody for the sake of interviewing. It's got to be something that I feel that I think, people need to hear, or that I'm curious about. I often get people who are business people, and even though I've had business people on, I am not a business podcast. This is about women, Black women's empowerment. This is about us tapping into our imagination and tapping into our knowledge and, learning about other people and their process. So, and I've talked about this before, but I don't know why I felt the need to say this, but just know that it's not because I don't think they're a dynamic person or they have a great offering. It's just I look for specificity when it comes to the Black Women Amplified podcast. So every episode is curated, and I put a lot of work into putting my interviews together. So I'm not doing it just for the sake of having people on the show. That's why there's not an interview every single show. I could, but if it don't feel right, I ain't doing it at the end of the day. But anyway, back to Nicole. Yes, so she follows the family lineage, which I think is fantastic. And she has a deep passion for Black history, which I think is fantastic. And I love the character of Velma. Here she is flying around the country, following clues in her own airplane, honey. Okay, she's not just a pilot. She has her own plane in the 1930s. Check that out. That's deep. That in itself is deep. And then she created, mind half knit wit butts. It's like, I've never heard of Rainbow Crescent. And Nicole was like, I made it up. But it was based off of historic seaside towns that we don't think about Black folks luxuriating on the beaches in the 1930s and the 1920s, because we only get one story of what's happening. But we have an array of things were happening around the world and around the country, I should say. So yeah, if you get an opportunity to read the book, it's very fascinating. Make sure you read it from the very, very beginning before the first chapter so that and get the physical book so that you can see all of the family tree and just her introduction to all the things. So thank you for listening to the Afterglow, giving you a little bit of insight of my thoughts of the interview, my thoughts of the book, and I will talk to you soon. Have an amazing day, and don't forget to download the journal at www.blackwomenamplified.com/power story, and that will also put you on our newsletter. You don't want to miss out on the newsletter. And go to the website and read the blog. Have an amazing day wherever you are in the world. Sending you light and love, peace, joy, and prosperity.
Thank you for listening to Black Women Amplified. We hope you enjoyed the show. Be sure to subscribe and log on to blackwomenamplified.com for more information. Keep shining.